Hi there, class. In this short video, I'd like to share 5 tips for easier and more effective engagement with research sources. There's a lot of information out there, and so the real trick is finding how to get information that will actually help inform your research project and move your interests forward. So here they are. I think all of these are pretty easy to work with. It just kind of takes a little bit of familiarity. You might even be doing some of them already. This first tip to get you through especially longer resources like books or longer articles a little more easily is to start by scanning the table of contents. You might do this when you pick up the source for the first time and you're doing an assessment to just ask the question, is this actually related to the question I'm working on? Is this a useful resource for my project? Take a look through the table of contents, and number one, it will tell you if the resource is going to be relevant. It can also be a good way to guide you to the specific parts of that larger piece of work so that you can focus on the things that are actually going to be most relevant and helpful to your work. The short thing here is you don't need to read a book cover to cover in order to decide that it's not relevant. Just take a quick look at the table of contents to get started. And here's what you can do. This is a sample excerpt from a table of contents from a textbook on marketing. It starts here with, general pieces about marketing, but perhaps what I'm actually interested in is how to develop a strategic plan for a new marketing campaign. One way to implement the strategy I'm talking about here is instead of starting at page 1 and reading through everything, why not just jump to the second chapter where they're talking about strategic planning and pick up on the part that you're actually most interested in. Tip number 2 here, it's related, but it's actually the reverse approach. Most longer resources, especially books, will have something called an index at the back of the book, at the very end after the text is done. Check out those back pages, and you'll typically find an index of key terms or major topics that are discussed, and they'll be organized alphabetically. If you take a look at the index, it can do a few things. It can help you to get a better sense of what the major ideas in the text are, and you can then therefore focus on them. Pretty often, the index will also include specific page numbers, and if you're working with a digital resource, it will allow you to jump directly to those pages so that if you're again interested, say in strategic planning for marketing, you can look under the S in the index and see exactly which pages strategic planning is listed on. If you're using a digital book or other kind of digital source, you can use the equivalent of the index by using the find feature. So depending on your computer or device, Control F will bring up a search tab and you can just type in the keyword you're looking for and it will automatically highlight all of the occurrences of the word. So again, in that sample textbook on marketing, I pulled up the index page here. Most books have pages and pages and pages in the index, especially if they're really well done, they'll be detailed. And so here you can see that this is just for part of the G, part of the H, and part of the I section. There's things here from theoretical principles to names of companies and more. And in this digital copy, you can click on those blue hyperlinked page numbers to get right to the topic. So if I were working on a project on idea generation, I could click it and get right there. Third tip here, as you're getting into the text a little bit, this applies to articles, books, web pages, really any kind of source. You can skim and read for highlights before you do a detailed read. Reading is difficult. There's no way to get around that, and it also takes up our time. So rather than getting bogged down by reading every word from the very beginning all the way through, I encourage you to start by moving through the text kind of quickly. Take a look at the major concepts, and there's different strategies for doing this. You can look at things like major heading labels or places where boldface font show up, keywords, key vocabulary. You can also use a strategy where you read the introductory paragraph of a chapter, maybe the first paragraph, and then read just the first sentences of each paragraph after that, because usually that's where the main idea shows up. If you do this, and there's really great content, then you can read more detailed for a second reading. But if the content isn't just what you need, then the great news is you haven't wasted a lot of time. You can move forward and work on something else instead. 2 more tips. I'll say in this sample textbook page, if I were to be kind of scanning and skimming over this, I wouldn't be reading every word. I would probably start by looking at the blue text here, which is different heading levels on market research, factors impacting diverse marketing. I might also be looking here at these bold-faced things or reading the first sentences in each paragraph. Just one strategy among others you could use to scan or skim the text. This 4th strategy here is going to be for a little bit later. Once you've decided you have found a text that you want to work with, it's fairly common, I notice, with students to want to find entire sections of the text to quote. So they end up having really big quotations in their papers. And it's a good practice to use quotations, but it turns out you can achieve a whole lot more if you're willing and able to summarize or paraphrase the text using your own language. And as I mentioned elsewhere, faculty here at CSUCI in the upper division business courses have identified effective summaries as one of the top skills they hope students could come out of Business 310 using. So, a couple points here as you're reading through a chapter or an article or some other longer resource. Use direct quotes when it's necessary. So when you just have to keep the original wording to keep the same message. Otherwise, the skill to try to work on is to start using a summary. Think about reading a longer section of the text, maybe a couple pages. What was the main idea? And then rephrase that source using your own words, consolidate the language, and the benefit here is it will really show that you have a solid comprehension of what that source was about, and you won't be using up as much space in your paper because you've got other things you want to write about. A subtle difference here with paraphrasing is if you choose to summarize or outline things in a source without going through it in the same order. Maybe for strategic reasons, you want to jump to the conclusion and present that first and then backtrack and go through the reasons about how they got there. That would be a paraphrase. And again, that's a really nice pro move and tip number 4 here to be able to get the sources communicated efficiently and effectively. The final tip that I'll share here and elaborate on in another video is to think about pulling sources out of the sources you're looking at. For all of the assignments that we have that are calling for secondary research, there is a requirement for several different sources. If you find a resource that is really effective and really gets to the main topic that you're wanting to explore, look at their works cited page or their in-text references, look up the sources that they're using, and then find them. And if they're relevant, use them as well. It will save you the step of having to find a whole bunch of sources on your own when you can just go to one that can become like the key to finding all these others. So find passages, statistics, really anything else that a source references from another source, track down the original source, and you can cite the same information that they're doing as well. As I said, keep an eye out for future videos where I talk about some strategies that you can use with digital tools like Google Scholar or our very own Broom Library website to make this process work a little bit more efficiently. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I hope these tips are helpful for you in your research process.